Hey all. So, during the big depths of going through YouTube and reading online, it's always interesting to hear other people's opinions and information on various topics. And of course, I like to do that with Linux topics. No big surprise there. But there's a couple of misconceptions I found online from different sources of information. Some from people that are new to Linux, some people that are quite tenured in Linux, and there were a couple of things I just wanted to clear up. So here are some of the couple of top five Linux misconceptions, and my suggestion is to not fall into this trap. So I'm starting off here, and I'm saying Fedora is not the new Arch. Fedora is not the new Ubuntu, right? So something important to remember about Fedora is that this distro has been around since 2003, and they've done great work over the years. However, Fedora hasn't really changed a lot. Fedora is mainly known for adopting upcoming technologies first, especially when it comes to things like in the past with Pulse Audio or Pipewire or with Wayland, etc. So quite often, if you want to know what other distros are probably going to adopt, maybe in a year or so, you can look at Fedora first. But the reason I said it's not the new is one out of the box, it only has free and open source software unless you add additional repos to it, which isn't always the most user friendly thing to do. Um, and often people call this thing a rolling release distro. Fedora is not a rolling release distro, right? Fedora every 6 months does a new point in time release, new repos, and essentially that's it. So you upgrade it. Just because it has some newer packages and other distros doesn't mean it's a rolling release. So remember, Fedora is not rolling release. And there's another misconception where people think that Fedora is based on Red Hat, and that's not true. Actually, what comes first is Fedora, actually Rawhide, which is the continuous packages. It then moves into alpha into beta, and then it has a specific version. Then what happens is Red Hat takes a snapshot of a specific version of Fedora. Then it goes into CentOS Stream as a non-point release, and eventually, after all those additional testings is moved on, it goes into one of Red Hat's enterprise Linux distros. So remember, Red Hat comes out of Fedora, not the other way around. Again, it's a great distro. I've personally nothing against it, and I know it's the big popular one at the moment. But nothing major has changed suddenly with Fedora to make it the big king of the castle. Uh, Moving on and talking about that is you often now read about the doom and gloom of Ubuntu desktop. Now, this is something I don't understand. I know in recent times Ubuntu isn't fashionable, right? But I think it's also very important to understand Ubuntu is not going to disappear overnight. Granted, Conical has put more focus into the server side of it, but also on the desktop side of things, it's important to remember that because Ubuntu's been around for so many years and so popular, right? For a lot of new people, the documentation is out there. You read online, it's there. And of course, Ubuntu powers so many respins out there. I mean, there's Mint, there's Pop! OS, there's Elementary. We could just continue with that. And, the fact that out of, on the server side, that 47.3% of Linux websites out there are powered by Ubuntu says quite a lot. I've put a point where I said it's an unofficial standard in the Linux space. Whether people want to accept it or not, quite often a lot of third-party software packages that come out, they recommend Ubuntu these days. Obviously, there's some at times specific RAID controllers that are still mainly for on the enterprise stuff, focusing on Red Hat, but even a lot of that now is also including Ubuntu. Um, and you know what? When it comes to if you're running a mixed Windows, Linux, and Mac environment, Ubuntu is often quite easier to integrate into that environment, especially into an AD environment. So I wouldn't count Ubuntu out yet. I know with recent some people are unhappy with snap packages, and the newer Firefox snap package, which the Mozilla Foundation requested, by the way, is a bit slower to start off. Not necessarily the greatest experience, but definitely Ubuntu is still really right top there, and it's still considered the most widely used Linux distro in the home and server industry. So yeah, don't count it out yet. Ironically, I'm not an Ubuntu fanboy. I've never really been an Ubuntu fanboy, but I just wanted to kind of set the record straight there. And another thing, of course, is the darling Manjaro. And so many people online refer to Manjaro as an Arch based distro or as an Arch distro. And Manjaro is in a funny place. Manjaro is not Arch Linux, right? So quite often you'll see that people try to combine packages from normal Arch, or they use AUR packages, and then they wonder why Manjaro falls apart, right? It's important to remember Manjaro has its own packages. Granted, a lot of the packages come from the Arch, but and it is compatible with Arch to a point, but it's not Arch, right? It doesn't have access to Arch's repos. It only has access to the Manjaro repos and AUR. Um, Manjaro isn't an easy to install version of Arch. If you want an easy to install version of Arch, go use something like Garuda Linux or Zero Linux or Arca Linux. That's Arch, right? That's closer to Arch. Um, if you try to do that with Manjaro, you're gonna have a bad time. You're gonna have errors. You're gonna have software that's behind. Um, Manjaro generally has two lines: stable and testing. Testing, the packages are much closer to Arch in the timeline, but if you're going to be using Manjaro testing, you might as well then be using Arch. And of course, Manjaro stable is a previous snapshot of the Arch packages. Again, if you use Manjaro and don't use the AUR with it, please, even though you can, then it's generally quite a stable distro. You can kind of think of Arch or Manjaro is kind of like the Linux Mint of the Arch world, while not being compatible, like where Mint is compatible with Ubuntu. Manjaro, please don't say it was an Arch distro. Another point is there seems to be this thing where everyone hates snap packages for some reason. Now, the technology itself is an open source technology, and I know by default it immediately gets all the repos from Canonical. Whether you like that or don't like that, that's your decision. But it's important to remember that a lot of desktop publishing companies out there are publishing straight to snap packages. I mean, Spotify is doing it, Microsoft is doing it, um, even a couple of the open source communities are doing it. Um, and Snap isn't only for desktop applications. Snap is actually used quite often in server applications as well. If you are a self-hoster and you need to get something like Nextcloud or OwnCloud up and running quite quickly, Snap is an awesome way of doing it. Easy, out of the box. Um, you know, IoT apps, server tools, system devices, printer drivers. Snap Packages really supports that, and it does it actually really great. Well, on the desktop side, the first time you launch a Snap package, it does tend to be a bit slower. I know there's a lot of additional work that's been done in that space, but to turn people away from a distro because it uses Snap packages, I don't understand that. I will say, you know, unfortunately, Snap packages for browsers is a little bit complicated. Just because they tend to be a little bit slow at first, but I think given some time, it will be even better. But yeah, if you're using Snap packages for the correct reasons, it actually works pretty well. And lastly, caring about what Linux distro you use. You know, please, there are so many different Linux distros out there. I mean, you've got the Arches, you've got the SUSEs, you've got uh, Rocky, you've got CentOS, you've got Ubuntu, you've got Slackware, you've got so many. And at the end of the day, use the distro that is best for you. If you prefer using it out of the box easier, do that. If you want to build it from scratch, do that. But at the end of the day, no one actually really cares which distro you use or which distro anyone uses. Granted, there is some minority of people out there that are really passionate and think everyone should use a distro, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And let's be pretty honest here. Most distros these days are all pretty similar to each other, right? Yes, there might be some different package managers. Yes, some versions of software might be slightly different. But at the end of the day, a lot of the GNU Plus Linux OSs are very much all of the same. Like, I know people don't want to really admit that, but it is pretty much what it is. Within reason. I know there's exceptions there before anyone comes at me with pitchforks. But yeah, use what you want to use, what's most compatible, what you're happy with, what you can find the most documentation for, and what's relevant. And be respectful of others and their decisions as well. Everyone should choose what they want to use. And on that, that's going to be the end of my video. It would be great to hear your comments if there's anything you agree or disagree with. And yeah, take care.